takeaways or their final thoughts. Jen, do you want to lead us off with a couple of your final thoughts from today's presentation?
Sure. As you probably gathered from our presentations, the jurisdiction here of these laws is so broad that almost all companies have exposure to U.S. sanctions and export controls. And that sort of leads to the next point, is that an effective risk-based compliance program is now effectively required. There's no statutory or legal requirement to have one, but you really can't operate in a global world and not have some sort of risk mitigation through compliance programs. And the last thing is that, again, just to emphasize, these laws are very dynamic. As you've seen, these are just all the updates that have happened over the last 12 or so months, and more changes are coming. And so you really need to be on top of this, and maybe this is part of that plan, right? To see where everything is and make sure that you haven't missed something, but just be on the lookout because things change quickly and with very little notice, and you can be facing penalties if you're not careful.
Thank you so much. And James, some key takeaways from yourself.
I would echo the fluidity of the export control and sanctions regimes that we're dealing in now. We are in the age of Twitter diplomacy, and with that comes announcements, changes that can occur overnight. As we've seen with the Entity List designations, UVL designations, these things happen if you don't have a policy or procedure in place that allows you to adjust for those changes. You could find yourself in one of those enforcement actions. The other thing is that as enforcement increases, I think it's safe to assume that government resources are getting better at targeting what these potential violations. Particularly one example, exports from the United States. As you may be aware, a lot of the automated export system filings have now gone online into the automated commercial environment monitored by customs. That means that we now have data. We have lots of data about our exports, about what's leaving the United States. That's a lot easier to come through, a lot easier to monitor. And I think a lot of future enforcement is going to be tied up in that data review.
Thank you so much. And Michael, some key takeaways from yourself.
Sure. I think the one that I highlighted earlier is that sanctions has become the primary foreign policy tool, not just under the Trump administration, but it's been trending upward for quite a while now, just because it is that happy medium between going over and giving somebody a sternly worded letter and sending troops. Sanctions is kind of the central option. So every time there's a new conflict, we can expect at least the threat of sanctions to loom, which creates the need for sort of a 360-degree risk assessment around sanctions. You can't just expect the shipping folks to understand it and have one compliance person to take care of things. You have to be thinking about it in terms of M&A due diligence, customer agreements. What are you going to do if your customer owes you, a couple $100,000 in accounts receivable, but you can't accept the payment because they've been blocked, or you have persons in a foreign jurisdiction that it seems like there's some scuttlebutt about new sanctions potentially coming out. What are you going to do to protect them and ensure that they can continue to operate there under your brand? All of those considerations take long-term planning, big picture thinking across groups and departments, and it can't be a silo operation. So just something to think about as you are evaluating your sanctions compliance program or establishing or updating one.